Chapter 3, Summer Surprise. How Liza convinced me to join her for happy hour at the Irish Times the next day was still a mystery to me. She was my best friend and had managed a mildly persuasive argument about celebrating Alfred Jackman's 24 hours of sobriety, but 6:30 was way too early to be leaving the office even on a Friday night. It didn't matter that RG had already left to fly back to Ohio for the weekend, or that Janet had gone home early for her son's birthday dinner. I still had to answer to myself and my mountains of unfinished work, and neither of us was easily pushed over. I compromised by deciding I'd have a couple beers for Liza and Alfred, and then head back to my desk for a slightly buzzed wrap-up. Everybody would win. So the hearing went great, Liza squealed supportively as she hugged me beside the bar stools. Yeah, amazingly, Mr. Jackman pulled it off. I still couldn't quite believe it. You mean you pulled it off? She loyally insisted. Liza was the only consistent cheerleader in my life, and didn't seem to mind this thankless and often seemingly pointless role. She also had an odd fascination with documentaries about reformed S&M enthusiasts and was an avid Red Sox fan, so it had occurred to me more than once that maybe she was just a glutton for punishment. She was tall and angular, studiously stylish, and naturally gorgeous. I had met her at a fundraiser in Cincinnati. RG had needed food to go as he dashed out the door post-schmoozing, and Liza had been the caterer. After she moved to D.C. months later to handle events for the Mayflower Hotel, we'd become close friends. Liza was the sort of girl one was alternately jealous of and shocked by. She was genuinely sweet and captivatingly attractive, but insisted on continuously stumbling into poor choices, mainly of the romantic persuasion, or in many cases the purely physical one. She went for preppy, jockey, unfaithful men. There were plenty of these to go around in D.C., and go around they did. Her latest had been recovering from a knee injury sustained during a weekend rugby game on the mall. He had insisted on buckling on a knee brace every time before sex, and then had left her for his physical therapist, a petite redhead who'd apparently been handier with the straps. Liza had felt at an occupational disadvantage, and was still bruised by the breakup. I, on the other hand, was overjoyed to be rid of him, and his penchant for trying to provoke me into debates over the merits of Hooters restaurants and all-male country clubs. To Sammy Joyce and Alfred Jackman, today's stars of the Senate. Liza clinked her bud bottle against mine and took a celebratory swig. I drink to that. Alfred Jackman had done a pretty good job. His marijuana withdrawal-induced grumpiness had been interpreted by everyone else as frustration with the inadequacy of the healthcare system, and the list of legal drugs he needed for his condition, along with their exorbitant price tags, had made a definite impression on the committee. Senator Gary had made his point, and Alfred Jackman was safely out of my jurisdiction, so the beer went down easy. That is, until Liza elbowed me in the side, effecting a sort of mini Heimlich. What? I sputtered. She nodded almost imperceptibly towards my right. I swiveled completely perceptibly to check out what she was signaling about, prompting another elbow attack. Ouch! Cut that out. I did see what all the fuss was about, though. The guy ordering a drink one stool over was undeniably hot. And not just DC hot, but actual real-world hot. He smiled inquisitively when he caught my eye. I immediately swiveled a retreat. Liza was glaring at me. Are you ever going to learn how to check someone out? No, I answered honestly. Liza sighed. She was a subtle, cool one. I brought something else to the table. A sort of unsubtle anti-cool, if you will. Sorry, I offered, but he's not your type anyway, is he? I thought goatees had been blacklisted. Liza had dated 3 goateed men in a row, and her sensitive skin had only recently recovered. She had lately been quite vocal about her new anti-goatee platform, one that I had readily endorsed, as I had always considered facial hair unsanitary. But I had the unsettling feeling that the way our new neighbor pulled his off might induce me to entertain some dirty thoughts. Not him, Liza whispered. Him. This time her phantom nod more accurately indicated a new bartender who must have just begun his shift. Okay, that made much more sense. He was hot as well, but in a more muscular, less trustworthy way. Right up Liza's alley. I was just beginning to wonder if our happy hour had devolved into only a man can make me happy hour when Liza refocused her attention on me. We'll meet them later. Tell me about the rest of your day, she smiled at me. And that was another great thing about Liza. She was just the right amount of girly. Guy aware, but not guy crazy. I had lots of friends who would pretend to be interested in a night of catching up, and then morph into giggly backstabbers at the first whiff of polo aftershave. Women who were lightning fast with a put-down joke or dismissive wave. Whatever it took to seem more pretty or witty or larger trusted to the nightly swarm of male barflies. But not Liza. She was loyal and genuine. Not in an aggressively girl powerish way, but in a sane and appreciated one. We spent the next hour talking and laughing, fueled by several more beers and hampered only by my niggling sense of guilt that I wasn't yet back at the office. No problem, I told myself. Wrapping up the work week was even more fun when I myself was wrapped up in a warm beer glow. After all, the happy employee was a more productive employee, and thankfully a drunk employee couldn't get fired if her bosses had already gone home for the weekend. I had just convinced Liza that I really did need to head back, but that I really would meet her later when I spotted a man in a wheelchair trying to make his way through the door. A table leg jammed next to the doorway was thwarting his attempts, as his front wheel kept bumping into it no matter what angle he tried. No one seemed to notice his struggle. Certainly no one was offering any assistance. Something in his grumpy determination reminded me of a sober Alfred Jackman, and before I knew it, I was on my feet and hurrying towards him, while Liza tried to get the hot bartender's attention under the guise of ordering another beer. I approached the patrons of the offending table, a young, buttoned-up couple on what seemed like their first date, and fixed them with a polite smile. I just need to shift you guys over for a second. No need to move. I exhaled as I attained a firm grip on their table. Before they could respond, I gave a quick tug, dragging the table clear of the doorway and out of the wheelchair's path, and in the process, upending the full pitcher of beer they'd just ordered onto the white silk blouse-clad chest of the startled woman. I stood helpless for a moment, trying to calculate these latest entries into my karmic account balance. Did helping a handicapped man make up for assaulting an innocent woman with cheap beer? What the hell is wrong with you? The man in the wheelchair demanded. Interesting. I'd been expecting gratitude from him, anger from the couple. He was completely throwing me off my game. I was just trying to help, I explained feebly, so you could get through the door. I can take care of myself. I don't need any help from a klutz. He barked loudly enough for the entire bar to hear. Right. Okay, so maybe the beer-drenched couple would also have surprising reactions, but in a good way. I turned my attention hopefully and apologetically towards them. The woman was crying softly as she tried to cover the wet t-shirt effect of the spilled beer with a flimsy cocktail napkin that was nowhere near up to the task. Her companion looked bewildered and concerned. So I'd offended a crippled man and reduced a nicely dressed woman to tears. Karma-wise, I was pretty sure it was down. My own eyes began to burn ominously as I felt the gazes of the surrounding clientele disapprovingly fixed upon me. The 3 beers I'd drunk had, unfortunately, softened up my normally slightly thicker skin, and I knew that in this state nothing could bring a tipsy meltdown quite like the wrath of strangers. "I'm really sorry," I whispered to the couple. My voice had apparently been chased away by the surge of acute embarrassment swelling through my chest. I was about to turn and retreat back to Liza, parentheses, who was where, by the way, just watching me suffer, close parentheses, when I felt a strong hand on my arm. "Well, thank goodness someone got this night started," a voice above me drawled. I looked up to make eye contact for the second time that evening with the very hot, even for the real-world guy from one bar stool over. "Hi," I whispered, wondering if my voice planned on a long vacation. He smiled at me and I felt my neck rash flare up. I'd always had very specialized physical manifestations of anxiety, uncontrollable shaking when self-conscious before authority figures. Laughing fits in the presence of scary animals, and when confronted by extremely attractive men I wanted to like me, a severe neck rash. It began with a deep flush, which quickly dissolved into tiny red bumps that paraded from my chest bone to my ears. It was relatively rare. The guy had to really do something for me, and it was never, ever pretty. I kept a fashionable scarf my mother had given me in my bag for such emergencies, but my bag was back at the bar stool, leaving me no choice but to wrap my hands around my neck in what could possibly be construed as a whimsical gesture, but much more likely looked like a bizarre self-strangulation pose. Maybe he was into that. He had averted his gaze and was looking kindly at the shaken couple. "Why don't you give her your jacket?" he suggested to the man, who quickly complied, covering up his date far more efficiently than the paltry napkin had managed to do. "And why don't both of you have another round on me?" he continued gallantly. "That is, when the bartender's done hitting on your friend." He smiled back at me. I turned around to see that the bartender was indeed talking conspiratorially with Liza, who appeared to be writing down her number on a cardboard coaster. My annoyance towards her dissipated, replaced by extreme gratitude that she had been oblivious to my disaster, because that had allowed me to be much more satisfactorily rescued by... "My name's Aaron," he offered helpfully, sticking out his hand. "Sammy." It's a pleasure to meet you, Sammy. You were really sweet to try and help that guy. Unfortunately, he's a grouchy drunk in here every night. You didn't know what you were getting yourself into." "No, I sure didn't." "Now, can I get you a drink?" "Yes, you sure can." He was staring at me, looking more and more handsome by the heartbeats pounding in my ears. Handsome and expectant. Oh, right, time to answer him out loud. Sure, sock it to me." "Sock it to me? Sock it to me?" Where the hell did that come from? Wasn't that an old catchphrase on Laugh-In? What had provoked me to say it, and the tone I'd used hadn't been playful at all, which would have saved it. It had instead come out in a sort of guttural way. Which just made me sound crass and demanding. That wasn't me. What sabotaging 70s poltergeist was channeling me from the other side. I decided to get my Ouija board revenge later. There was an image repair emergency to tend to at the moment. Let's see. Do they serve Klutz martinis here? I asked in what I prayed was a much more appealing tone. That's my signature drink. Aaron laughed. Afraid not. But I think they've got a Good Samaritan shot with a bad break chaser. He smiled at me. Sounds great. We made our way back to our stools just as Liza looked up from her huddle with the hunky bartender. She glanced at my neck and quickly and smoothly handed me the scarf from my bag. Liza, this is Aaron. Aaron, Liza. I fastened the scarf around my neck as they shook hands. And this is Ryan, Liza indicated the bartender. Ryan was certainly a looker, and at the moment he was surreptitiously looking me up and down. Oh, Liza, no, not another one. Ryan's going to show me some of the mixers they have in the back. I've been looking for some better deals for the Mayflower. Liza smiled at me as she disappeared after Ryan through the door behind the bar. Well, that worked out. Now I won't be being rude when I only pay attention to you, Aaron said. Nope, nothing rude about that. And even if that was a little liney, it sounded charming coming from him. Where's that accent from? Somewhere southern. Maybe a little south of heaven? I inwardly retched at my tumble into cheesiness, and was only mildly comforted by the fact that no one would ever know those words had existed in my brain. But I knew. It was time to pull it together. He wasn't that great. You work for Senator Gary, don't you? Aaron continued. I've seen you around. He had. When? Where? Had I known I was being watched? Had I been doing anything embarrassing? The chances that I had were distressingly high. Yeah, I'm Senator Gary's domestic policy advisor. I smiled brightly at him, trying to bind him with either my freshly whitened teeth or my relatively impressive job title. Wow, that's great. I'm impressed. Those Crest White strips were a bitch to put on, but they really worked. And what about you? I asked, feeling a little more confident. It seemed as though he also worked on the Hill. I hoped so. I wanted to be involved with someone who cared about the same things I did. But what if he did something really low-level? That was fine with me, but would he be threatened by my success? I hope I hadn't emasculated him. That was no way to start the serious relationship we were clearly destined to have. I'm the head speechwriter for Senator Brahman, he answered. John Brahman, senior senator from New Jersey, ranking member on the most powerful committee in the Senate, early frontrunner in the presidential race, all-around major heavyweight, a jerk by most accounts, but an extremely successful one. We were just 15 fast months away from the election day that very well might make Brahman president. Aaron's ego probably wasn't too bruised. Gosh, that must keep you pretty busy. Could I be any more bland? It was dangerous to dare myself. It's challenging but rewarding, and it only drives me to drink every other night. He smiled modestly. Would I tell our children that his smile was the first thing I fell in love with? Assuming I could get a word in edgewise as their father smothered me with passionate kisses for the rest of my life. Aaron was checking his watch. Oh no, bad sign. Say something witty, I yelled at myself. Look alluring, damn it. I felt my neck flare stronger under the mounting pressure. Actually, Behrman's on 20/20 tonight, and I'm supposed to watch, Aaron said. There it was. I was getting the Heisman after a mere 10 minutes. Sadly, that wasn't even a personal record. But I'd really been digging him. This sucked. The thing is, I'd much rather stay here talking to you, he continued. Really? Plus, for the safety of the other patrons' outfits, I really don't think you should be left unsupervised, he continued. Do you mind excusing me for a second so I can make a quick call? I felt myself fall instantly and deeply into infatuation. To mark the occasion, I smiled goofily at him as he moved away to dial his cell phone. Technically, I was supposed to be returning to the office, but what if this guy turned out to be the love of my life? In the big scheme of things, which is more important, killing myself to succeed at work or finding a soulmate? The unnerving thing was that at this stage of my life, it was sort of a close call. I decided to use the phone call time wisely to come up with good conversation topics and prep some of my go-to stories. I knew I had a foolproof bit about water parks, but how to segue? Should I open with embarrassing cell phone stories? Certainly a natural transition, and I definitely had a bevy of them. But sometimes when I mimic the static crucial to such stories, I inadvertently spit a fair amount, and that probably wasn't all that seductive. I clearly just needed to get him drunk pretty quickly. I'm afraid I have tragic news. He was back. It turned out his frown was just as tremendous as his smile. It made him look sexily disgruntled. I couldn't get through to someone to tape the show for me, and TiVo's not returning my calls, so I've unfortunately got to head out. I'd ask you along, but I know a lady such as yourself wouldn't let me get to the Barbara Walters stage before we've even had our first real date. No, of course not. Babs is well on the way to second base. Exactly. I feel we need to build on that sort of intimacy. Maybe warm up with some good old-fashioned 60 Minutes. It's so refreshing to meet a true gentleman. Laughing, he took my hand and leaned down to kiss it. Till later, then. He smiled one last breathtaking time and was gone. Back at my apartment that night, I endlessly replayed every moment of my interaction with Aaron, mercilessly punishing myself for not coming up with the cleverer responses that seemed so obvious hours later. As I lay there festering, repartee, hindsight was 20/20 in more ways than one. I was also vaguely curious how Senator Behrman had done on the show. Probably very well. He was so polished and professional. One of his glaring faults being that he knew how polished and professional he was. The fact that he'd never run for president before was a miracle, given his soaringly high opinion of himself. I didn't have any personal experience with Behrman, but I'd heard plenty about him through the Hill grapevine since arriving in D.C. Though Behrman and R.G. had been elected to Congress the same year, Behrman had apparently devoted considerably more of his time during the ensuing decade to relentless pandering and self-promotion. His undisguised ambition, coupled with his aggressive maneuvering, had propelled him from the moment he was sworn in towards an inevitable race for the presidency. I had heard others say that anyone who really knew Behrman didn't mistake his motivations for a genuine desire to improve the lives of his fellow Americans. To the contrary, they understood that he was clearly in the mix for his own betterment. In my opinion, this made Behrman the polar opposite of R.G. in terms of integrity and style. And yet the very qualities that I deplored in Behrman were the same ones that had garnered him tremendous clout on the Hill. He held far more sway than RG did, as unfair as that seemed to me. I wondered how well Aaron knew Brayman. Was he aware of his boss's considerable shortcomings? I hoped that he wasn't, because I sensed I'd have trouble being with someone who willingly worked for such a tainted cause. And there could easily be a respectable reason for Aaron's ignorance, I argued to myself. Perhaps he was too new on staff. He was certainly far too good-looking. I decided to give Aaron the benefit of the doubt pending further investigation, since there was a perfectly good chance that he just didn't know the truth. Perhaps it was my role to enlighten him. Maybe once Aaron fell madly in love with me, I could persuade him to renounce Brayman, leave his job, and come work for RG, thereby effecting a harmonious merging of my personal and professional lives. A goal I had been swaying towards for months. As I gazed up at the glow-in-the-dark constellations adorning my ceiling, I fantasized about all my stars aligning at last, and drifted delusionally off to sleep. Monday morning came much quicker than I was prepared for. I had gone into the office for a few hours on Saturday and then spent most of Sunday rollerblading with Liza along the Potomac. I wasn't what you would call a strong rollerblader, and Liza had needed to turn back often to encourage me along. I never thought it was a wise plan to have wheels strapped to my feet, but Liza had insisted it was good exercise, and at the very least it was refreshing to have a better excuse for taking a few tumbles. Plus, the knee pads, elbow pads, and helmet were fun to wear. They made me feel very lethal and important, and when I closed my eyes, I imagined I was participating in something far more adventurous and risky. And given that my eyes were closed, that usually was in fact the case. I felt distinctly sore as I dragged myself out of bed, which wasn't a sensation I enjoyed. As I waited for the shower to warm up, I started thinking about an article I'd read about people who were born without nerve endings, which resulted in them not being able to feel any pain. I wasn't sure if it was possible to develop this condition, but if it was, I felt pretty certain I was not prepared for it. However, after a brief internal debate, I decided that the condition was too high concept to train for on a Monday morning. I opted instead to spend my shower time reviewing the proper defensive responses to various animal attacks. When I was younger, I had begun this training by arranging my stuffed animals in various stations around my house to help me practice. The rule I made was that I would go about my day-to-day life, but whenever I made eye contact with any of these stuffed animals, I had to practice my emergency response on the spot. This resulted in various episodes along the lines of me trudging to the bathroom in the middle of the night, stumbling upon my plush alligator, and feeling compelled to continue my journey in a fast-paced diagonal run, parentheses, since alligators could only run fast in a straight line, one had to change direction frequently to survive their chase, close parentheses. Or while clearing the dishes after dinner, spotting my stuffed bear atop the hutch and immediately dropping to the floor in a tight, impenetrable ball. My parents were briefly alarmed at what appeared to them to be erratic, Tourette's-like behavior onsetting at a relatively early age. Once I explained the training regimen, my mom gave me a subscription to National Geographic, and my dad suggested I get outside more. I had just finished dressing and was reviewing shark attack survival tips when I made eye contact with Shackleton. He stared at me woefully from his bowl, seemingly too tired to nibble at his fish flakes. His gills had become even mossier over the weekend, though a Saturday afternoon trip to Mr. Lee's pet store, had elicited nothing but assurances that I was doing everything right. This had only served to increase my doubts about Mr. Lee's overall veracity. I should have known not to trust him the first day I walked into his shop. How could anyone really believe that a man named Mr. Lee, who played the 50s song Mr. Lee on a loop over his store's stereo system, was interested in anything but his own bottom line? Poor Shackleton. I wonder what the chances were that he had a Japanese fighting fish version of the no nerve ending condition and was therefore being spared whatever pain his slow death was causing. I blew him a kiss and arranged my most beautiful Japanese fan behind his bowl in an effort to make him feel more at home. He acknowledged my gesture with a feeble flutter of his tail. My BlackBerry buzzed with an urgent message from Janet telling me to get to the office as soon as I could. No time for a sit-down breakfast. Luckily, it was the 81st anniversary of the invention of the Klondike bar, and I had bought a box of them over the weekend in celebration. I grabbed a bar from the freezer and bolted out the door. When I hurried into the office, Janet eyed my wet hair with the expression of a public health inspector noting a restaurant that wasn't up to code. She gave me a split second to feel self-conscious. Parentheses, though the wet hairdo special was hardly out of the ordinary for me, close parentheses, before nodding towards RG's office. He came in early this morning, asked to see you, she instructed as she turned back to the ringing phone. I entered to find RG at his desk, reading and finishing up his breakfast of a half grapefruit and a handful of vitamins, a breakfast so far inferior to my chocolate fudge Klondike bar, I almost felt sorry for him, until I remembered that he was the powerful United States Senator, and I was the lowly aide who was about to be, tested, reprimanded, promoted. I was fairly certain we could rule out that last possibility. I got a call last night from John Brayman, RG said after ignoring me for a good 2 minutes while he finished reading a news story. Really? That was quite a coincidence. Goodness, was word already out that Aaron and I were soon to be an item? It seemed unlikely. He was impressed with the way the committee hearing went on Friday, and he wants to work with us in a more official capacity, RG continued. He wants to co-sponsor the bill, I asked. That's correct. So I'm going to need you to bring his staff up to speed on its intricacies. Wow. We'd been angling for a high-profile co-sponsor because we knew that scoring one could give the bill the momentum it needed to pass, but this was a surprise. Brayman had never even been on our list yet. If he liked the bill and wanted to lend his name, I didn't see anything wrong with using him to get something good done. Well, that's great, sir, isn't it? Archie peered at me over his reading glasses. It's probably good for the bill. We'll see how great it is overall as we go along. I watched RG shuffle through his papers with a tightened jaw and felt troubled. Though I had learned early on that senators often had to work in partnerships that weren't perfect fits, I could tell from RG's manner that he and Brayman weren't simply mismatched. I sensed an undercurrent of genuine dislike. What do you mean, sir? I asked, hoping for clarification. RG sighed. Look, I felt compelled to accept Brayman's offer for the sake of the bill, but I wished we didn't have to work with him because he can't be trusted, and neither can his staff. You'll need to stay on your guard. Oh dear. So Brayman's co-sponsorship wasn't great news, and worse, RG was explicitly warning me about Brayman staffers 2 days after I'd become infatuated with one. The feng shui dreams of seamlessly melding my personal and professional lives appeared doomed. But I wasn't quite ready to let go of the fantasy. Okay, but do you think that every single member of Bremen's staff is untrustworthy? I heard myself asking, without exception? I mean, wouldn't some of them be okay? Like, if they had just started, maybe, or if they were a fluke or something? Archie's baffled stare terminated my tangent. Never mind, sir. I continued quickly. I was just collecting my thoughts, which I resolved to do in silence from now on. As much as I wanted validation from my hypothetical relationship, I understood that it wasn't worth sounding like an idiot in front of my boss, or sounding any more like one, at least. Archie was looking hard at me. Are you up for this, Samantha? He asked with the slightest hint of apprehension. Of course I was. I would do everything in my power to make this bill a success, which included proving I was much more competent than my recent display indicated. Definitely, sir. You have nothing to worry about. Archie gave a satisfied nod. Great. Now, don't let Bremen's people bog you down with their interest group bullshit, and keep an eye out, especially for any insurance stuff they try to tack on. That's Bremen's trademark. He and the industry go way back. But you've got to keep the bill clean of that crap. Let me know if you run into problems. With that, he returned to his papers